Our remaining properties of water are related to acids, bases, and pH. So we've been through 3 so far. We have 2 more to go. Our book stops at 4, water as a solvent. I've added this fifth one as sort of a remaining property of water. And the reason for this is that I think it's really important for living organisms. So this is my addition. You still need to know it, just even though it's not stated in your book. So the last property that our book talks about is water as a solvent. So a solution is a liquid mixture with a component evenly distributed. Now there are 2 components, obviously, of a solution: the liquid that does the dissolving and the component that is dissolved. So the solute is the compound that is being dissolved. So in this picture over here on the left, we have sodium chloride again, our salt molecule, and it is the solute that is being dissolved in water. So that makes water our solvent, or the solution that does the dissolving. Now we are particularly interested in water solutions where water is doing the dissolving, and we call those aqueous solutions. So if you think about the word aqua, it means water. So a solution where water is doing the dissolving. We are worried about water as a solvent because 75% of living organisms are water. And 2/3 of our planet are water. So there's a lot of water running around. Water fills up our cells. It's the main component in our blood. It's really, really important in regulating our bodies. Water is a versatile solvent because of its polarity. You're probably really tired about hearing about the polarity of water at this point. But it's important because it will dissolve anything that is also polar or charged. So water will interrupt the interaction between chlorine and sodium because they are both charged. And they'll actually form a hydration shell. So a hydration shell is this sort of shell of water that surrounds the individual ions. So water actually forms a little bubble around the chlorine, which keeps it from interacting with sodium. And that's how you get something dissolved in water or evenly distributed. So if you're making soup and you pour a bunch of salt in there, you don't want it to just sit on the bottom because you want it to flavor your soup. So you heat it up and you stir it, and the water dissolves the salt. Because water is a solvent, water has to interact with a lot of things. And it's important for all living creatures. But not everything needs to or can interact with water. There are some very important biological substances that actually don't want to interact with water. So water is an important solvent, and it can dissolve things that are polar, but also substances that are hydrophilic. So hydrophilic means water loving. This comes from the word root of philos. Sorry, there's only one L in that, I believe, which means love, right? Philadelphia is the city of brotherly love. So these are substances that like water. Water is attracted to it. They interact well with water. And those are the things that water is going to dissolve. Water is going to fill up our cells because a lot of the biological molecules like proteins and nucleic acids, our DNA and RNA, are hydrophilic. Many are also polar. And that's really important for living cells. But there are also hydrophobic or water-fearing substances. These are substances that are nonpolar, non-charged, and they are repelled by water. So you're familiar with some of these. Oils and fats are two really great examples that you're familiar with. If you pour some olive oil into your pot of cooking water that you're going to put some pasta in, it stays on the top. Or if you have bacon grease in a pan and you try to clean it, you put water in the pan, the water beads up on top. That's because the water is so attracted to itself in its charged state that it is repelling anything that is nonpolar and non-charged. The unfortunate side effect is that we can't dissolve fats, so we can't just wash them out. But that's okay because our body actually needs fats for a very specific purpose. And one of the really important purposes of fats in our body are cell membranes. Now, these cell membranes are so important that we have an entire chapter on them. And cell membranes are hydrophobic because cell membranes, the purpose of the cell membrane is to isolate the cell from the surrounding environment. And it does that by repelling the water on the outside and keeping the water on the inside so that the environment can be different on the outside in. It also helps regulate movement of water and substances in and out of the cell. So don't think of hydrophobic substances as bad substances because they're absolutely not. They're just different kinds of substances, and they will not dissolve in water. All right, so to finish up our video here, we need to talk about pH, acids, and bases. So just like the whole rest of these last two videos, we're going to go back to water. Water molecules are sort of unstable. They like to form and break their hydrogen bonds, and they actually will lose their hydrogen ions or gain hydrogen ions. So water is really kind of always changing. And those hydrogen ions are really reactive. So we talked about chemical reactions where you have your reactants forming products, and you can also get the back reaction. So quite often, water will dissociate, which means comes apart. And when that happens, sometimes one water molecule will pick up a hydrogen from another. Now this happens because water molecules are pulling so strongly for those electrons that sometimes they'll actually attract the entire atom. So when that happens, you end up with a hydronium ion that has an extra hydrogen and a hydroxide ion that is missing a hydrogen. Now, hydronium is actually H3O, but we denote it as H+, just for simplicity. That hydroxide ion is denoted as OH-, indicating that it's water missing a hydrogen. So just sort of keep that in the back of your mind. Now, an acid is a substance that increases the hydrogen ion concentration of a solution. So an acidic solution is going to have a high hydrogen ion concentration. Those little brackets mean concentration. A base is a substance that reduces the OH concentration of a solution. So a basic solution is going to have a low hydronium ion or hydrogen ion concentration. Conversely, it's actually also probably going to have a high hydroxide ion concentration, because if you remove a hydrogen, if you are taking away this hydronium ion, you're going to be left with more hydroxides. We can use this idea of the concentration of hydrogen ions to calculate the pH. So the pH is the measure of acidity of a substance. Now, pH stands for, or is often called, potential hydrogen. So you can think of this as the amount of free hydrogen ions that are potentially in a substance. So pH is dependent on that hydrogen ion concentration, and it is a value, it is a number. pH is calculated by taking the negative log of the hydrogen ion concentration. You don't have to do that. I just want you to know where the number comes from. So pH is based on how much hydrogen ion is present in a solution. So a pH is going to decrease or become lower as the hydrogen ion increases. So we say that our solution is acidic. As the pH increases, our hydrogen ion concentration decreases, or we can also say that our OH concentration increases, and that is going to give us a basic solution. So acids have more hydrogen ions, and bases have less hydrogen ions. If you are using a printout of the PowerPoint, it's possible that this notation is backwards and that I have acid and base mixed up. Just double check if you're using it that we have low pH means it's acidic and high pH means it's basic. Try to get that fixed. If I forget, just make sure that you write it down here. All right, so our last property of water is that water has a neutral pH. So this is really important because it helps regulate the base pH, not basic, but the low or underlying pH in living organisms. Most living organisms are roughly neutral, not exactly neutral pH, but roughly. They definitely don't lean towards very basic or very acidic. And this is because cells just can't handle it. Remember, 70% of the cell is water, so that is going to influence sort of the max pH that a cell can be. Water has a pH of 6. That means that the hydrogen ion concentration is equal, excuse me, let me get my pen back. Water has a neutral pH, which is going to be right around 6. Sorry, 7. I am having all kinds of difficulty today. Water has a pH right around 7. So our human blood is going to be roughly neutral as well. Tears, the liquids in our body, are going to be roughly close to neutral. This image here gives you sort of a visual of the changes in concentration. So an acidic solution is going to have higher concentration of hydrogen ions. Basic is going to have a lower concentration of hydrogen ions. Neutral is going to have equal. And then as you move away from neutral, your hydrogen ions increase on the acidic side and they decrease on the basic side. So this also shows just some sort of common objects. Lemon juice, battery acid, those are very, very acidic. On the other side, we've got ammonia and bleach. Those are very, very basic. So everything else in between is sort of on this scale. you've got a lot of foods that are slightly more acidic, and your body has to be able to deal with that. If you drink a lot of lemon juice, you're probably going to get sick. It's probably going to make you feel nauseous because your body can't handle that change in pH. So correct your handout, sorry. pH of water is 7, not 6. Pure water is 7. All right, so the pH of our cells is right around 7, and it needs to stay there because chemical reactions are also affected by pH. And there are lots of biochemical reactions that are required for life that are happening in our cells. And so they have to happen at a very specific pH, often around neutral. And a slight change in pH can be harmful because it can disrupt cell membranes, it can disrupt cell processes. So very often we can use something called a buffer in a chemical reaction. And in our bodies, we have buffers that do the same thing. So a buffer is a substance that minimizes changes in the concentration of hydrogen ions and hydroxide ions. And they do this by donating or picking up hydrogen. So if there's a lot of hydrogen in the solution, it will pick up hydrogen to maintain a more neutral pH. If there's not a lot of hydrogen, it'll actually donate it to change the pH to make it more acidic. So blood pH is really important, and our blood has a buffer called carbonic acid, and it helps stabilize the pH in human blood. If your blood pH changes too drastically, you can actually die from it. So carbonic acid works by donating hydrogen ions. Remember, we said that an acid is a substance that donates or increases hydrogen ions in a solution. So carbonic acid, if pH is high, meaning basic, the reaction will lean towards the products and it will actually release its hydrogen ions and increase the acidity of the blood. Now, if the pH is low or the blood is becoming acidic, it will actually pick up hydrogen ions and go back towards the product. So carbonic acid is able to buffer or stabilize the concentration of hydrogen ions in our blood.